Check, check. I believe there's an IT gentleman coming back as well. So is this a little bit like the Oregon Trail? Like this is the only people that made it all the way over here? Died of dysentery, yep. So does anyone know if the IT gentleman was coming back? Maybe. Make sure the camera's working. Maybe. How many developers does it take to get a camera to turn on?
The card is blinking, so I guess
It's
writing
blinking
to the
yellow
card. So
light.
maybe it's just writing some data.
Welcome! Are there many more people out there still? No? But you guys made it, and you guys are the important ones. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. For those that come in late, you guys can fill them in. I'm here to talk about high-powered Chrome apps. So who here, just to get a feel of the room, knows what a Chrome app is? Okay, most of you. Who here of those people that know what a Chrome app is has built one? 1.2. All right, and then for those of you that don't know what a Chrome app is, how many of you are developers? And excited to find out what a Chrome app is? Hooray! All right. So my name is Stephen Fluin. I am the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for a company called MentorMate. We imagine, design, and build mobile and web experiences. Is the camera doing some weird, or the microphone doing some weird feedback, or is that just me?
There's a bad spot right around like this face.
So don't go over there. Okay. So I'm going to be doing gymnastics to find the spot. It's perfect. All right, you can still hear me? Okay, got it. So I'll stand about here. Is that right? All right, so my role at MentorMate is to help companies strategize and figure out, okay, how do we build applications in the best way possible? So during the day, I am a strategy kind of helping companies solve business problems, but then I'm a little bit of a developer werewolf, where at night I go home and I build cool applications. So that's kind of a bit about me. I'm a Google certified developer expert for Chrome. So there's about 32 of us in the US. All that really means is that Google has said, yes, he kind of knows what he's talking about. So I want to start off talking about the ecosystem, really. Why would you want to choose a Chrome app, for example? Chrome is everywhere. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but it's kind of been this sneaky strategy on the part of Google that I didn't really notice until it was almost complete. So if you look across all of the form factors that we use on a daily basis, looking out across the room, you've got laptops, you've got phones, you've got iPhones, you've got Macs, PCs, Linux. All of those run Chrome, which is kind of cool, right? Because we had this era from around 2004 to around 2008 or 2009 where the web kind of finally arrived, right? The web was the platform for development. And we all had to standardize on this set of HTML. Everyone hated IE because they sucked. But we had solved the problem, right? We had had one language for building applications and delivering those to consumers. Then mobile arrived, and that kind of started changing, right? It wasn't really suitable to build a HTML-based application and deliver great experiences on mobile. But what's happened now is technology has continued to advance, processors have gotten better, more RAM, et cetera, and now experiences are a little bit better on mobile, and it's time to start thinking about those things a little bit more. So one of the interesting things about Chrome is that they have this idea of the web store. So if you look back to when it was first launched in December of 2010, it was really just a set of terrible wrappers, right? So you had a web page, you would create a really dumb application, and then you would put it in the Chrome Web Store, and you'd say, hey, look, it's Netflix, but it wasn't really Netflix. It was just a link. But if you look forward to around September 2014, the Chrome Web Store, from many perspectives, had arrived. So there are complex applications that actually add value. So Spotify, for example, has a great application. there's a number of great apps, and I'll actually demo one here today a little bit. And then actually just this month, April 2015, things have changed again a little bit. So now there's the launch of something called Welder. Who here's heard of Welder? 5, perfect. So Welder is a way of taking an Android application, a .apk file, and actually building it for Chrome. And so what Google did is they created a binary layer that implements all of the Android APIs, including Google Play services, on Chrome. So now today, with some reasonable degree of certainty, you can actually take an Android application and build it and then wrap it and push it up to the Chrome Web Store, which means all of these things are kind of starting to live together. So this is a screenshot from Welder. I've put links. I also tweeted out the link for this presentation. A lot of these things are hard to find. So for example, if you search the Chrome Web Store for Welder, it's not actually going to come up. It's secret, it's beta, whatever, but if you go to that link, it should work. And so what you can actually do with this is you can choose landscape, portrait, tablet, phone, maximize, because more and more, I think there's about 40 official applications that are in the Chrome Web Store that were originally built for Android, but now you can build your own. And so we're kind of expecting some big things around that at Google I/O this year. But that is not always the best way to build applications, right? So in order for you to use Welder, you have to be building an Android experience. And so that comes with a lot of implications around threading. It comes with a lot of implications about how you build your UI. And that's not really appropriate for everyone. So there's a few other frameworks that I'm going to talk about here. So the next is Ionic, which is really just a combination of AngularJS and Cordova. So Cordova is a JavaScript interpretation layer that allows you to use web views and exposes native functionality via into the JavaScript layer. So you can make calls like, hey, Bluetooth, go get me that thing, or hey, camera, go get me a picture. And then just by making that simple JavaScript call, you're actually going to get back the things you want without having to code anything native. And this actually works web and mobile on both iOS and Android. And so you're going to see several links at the bottom. These are the install links, or the command to type if you're using NPM, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The problem with Ionic is that it's not perfect, and it's actually really hard to get started. So this is actually directly copied and pasted out of the Ionic website. So these are the instructions for the first-time user who's never used Ionic before. First, install Node.js. Then install the latest Cordova and Ionic command line tools. Follow the Android and iOS platform guides to install required platform dependencies. Windows users might, and it goes on and on and on. So by the end, you're a little bit like this guy. This is a picture from their website. You've climbed the hill, and it's really cool, but you had to climb a mountain to get there, which is kind of frustrating.
Where is this information?
This is on the Ionic website. So what I'm here to talk about is what are called Chrome Cordova apps, or Cordova Chrome apps. The C's are a little ambiguous, or CCA. And so what this is this is a combination of the Chrome APIs with Cordova. And so what that means is you're actually able to build applications using HTML, CSS, JavaScript that render in the Chrome, in the Chrome browser or in WebKit, and then you're actually able to ship those same APIs onto iPhones, Android phones, and the web. So why would you build a Chrome application? First of all, it's HTML5. So HTML5 is this really cool thing that keeps getting better and better. If anyone here went to Lloyd's talk? Anyone? Couple, nice. So HTML5, with the advancement of web components, you can actually create your own custom HTML elements, which is a really cool idea. And so this is a concept that's getting more and more powerful. I mentioned before, this Chrome Web Store is actually becoming increasingly useful. So if anyone has used any of the official Google apps, a lot of those want to expose more functionality, and they can't do that without getting an application installed on your system, and that's how they're doing it. The third is mobile support. So now with Chrome Cordova apps, which I'm here to talk about, you actually can build for mobile. And then the last piece is the Chrome APIs. So I'll actually mention 3 of my favorite APIs, which are really helpful in terms of building cool new applications. I'm a big fan of using the right tool for the right job. So we've got, if brute force doesn't work, you aren't using enough of it. But I do want to highlight that this type of application development is not for every app you want to build out there, right? If you are using anything that needs to integrate with Bluetooth, anything that needs to integrate with the video camera, Cordova or Chrome Cordova apps may not be the right choice. It may be, you just have to understand the trade-offs, just in the same way that building an application for Android and then trying to use Welder to make it ship on Mac, PC, and Linux, it might not always be the right choice. One of the key drivers that I was trying to think about is user experience. You cannot achieve the same level of native feel using any of these cross-platform frameworks. In order to achieve the utmost experience, you're always going to be building a native application for each platform that you want to be targeting, but that's not always the right choice. So one of the ways that I want to make it really easy for everyone to get started building Chrome apps is something called the Dev Editor. So if you haven't used it before, this is a Chrome app itself. So Google has used their technology stack to build an application that runs entirely in the browser, entirely locally on your system, and now they've built a IDE into it, which is kind of a cool idea. So it's really easy to get started building your first Chrome app. You install the Chrome Dev Editor using the URL I provided on the last page, or you can just search for it. It's pretty easy to find. You go into the menu, you hit New Project, you give your project a name, and then you tell it what project type. So they've actually included a set of scaffolding and a set of templates that make it easier to build applications. And so what I want to do now is I want to actually show you a live demo of how easy this can be. So I'm going to escape here. I'm going to go into my app drawer here, and I've already installed the Chrome Dev Editor. I launch it. The first time it has to download all of those templates, so it can take a minute. And then I'm going to go up into the menu bar, create a new project, give it a name. And I'm going to tell it to be a JavaScript Chrome application. And hit create. It has now created a manifest file for me, as well as all of the HTML and JavaScript that I might need to get started. And then if I hit run here at the top, we are actually now running a Chrome application. So that was it to get started, right? So things get a little bit more complicated, and I'll talk about how to include Angular, how to actually make this useful. But this is a really easy way to get started building Chrome apps. And so this is really just a HTML page that's being served and rendered locally. It can be responsive, you can pin it as a window, there's all sorts of options that you can set up in the manifest, but that's really all you need to do to get started. So this is the example app that I had up just a second ago. You're going to see you've defined your name, your short name. These are really just discoverability elements, right? So you want to be setting all of those properties in the same way that you'd be setting up an Android manifest file. You can set assets, and then you actually have to say, hey, these are the scripts, and these are the starting points for the application, right? Because you can actually, using a Chrome app, you can run code in the background. You can create code that responds to events that are happening in the system if you're doing something with service workers. And there's a lot more very powerful things you can do. There's a fantastic corollary to the Chrome Dev Editor, which is called the App Dev tool. So once again, this is a little bit hard to find, but I've included a link here. You actually have to download the APK directly from Google and install it. But what this does is this actually builds and runs an application that contains the entire tool chain, so you don't actually have to go out and get any of that Chrome Dev Editor. So what this allows you to do is when you, instead of hitting play, which runs it locally, you actually give it the IP address that's in the top over a Wi-Fi network or via cable, and then I hit run. And when I hit run on my desktop where I'm doing my development, it actually automatically runs it on my mobile device. And it's, once again, the same application in both the desktop world and in the mobile world. Yeah. Yep, yeah, I can actually show part of this. So unfortunately, the Wi-Fi network here is locked down, so I can't show the specifics. But let's say I'm in this project called Hi People, and then I'm just going to hit the menu, and instead of run, I'm going to say deploy to mobile. And so this is built in, the ability to deploy via USB or to deploy via network, which is what I always do. And then you can actually, there's I don't know if you can see this, but there's a live deployment checkbox. And if you check that box, you can actually use the Chrome development tools and the inspector to inspect the app code that's running live in your mobile environment, which is just a really cool end-to-end development and testing framework. Is that a good question? Yeah, any other questions as we're kind of going here? So I don't know if you can tell this, but it also has several other things built in. So it actually has built-in publishing tools. So let's say you've actually built your app, you've tested it, now you want to push it up to the Chrome Web Store. There's just a one-click button that does all the zipping and distribution of the assets. There's also a Git clone tool. So they've actually built in Git. One of the weird limitations is you can't use Bitbucket because Bitbucket has a invalid implementation of the Git standard. But if you use GitHub, for example, this works just fine. So we talked a little bit about who here is a developer and how some of you have heard of Chrome apps but not built them. What about Angular? Anyone here built Angular? Okay, a bunch more people. So the reason I'm talking about Chrome apps and Angular is not because there's any sort of intrinsic benefit to those combinations, just because I find this set of tools one of the fastest ways to build applications and one of the easiest ways to think about this idea of client-side web. So one of the things that I need to warn everyone about before they start trying to build Angular applications using Chrome apps is what's called the content security policy, or everywhere that you see it in documentation, it's called the CSP. And the CSP is a little bit like the old master control program of the Tron world, where it's actually trying to enforce standards in order to protect people. So it can be a little bit overzealous, and it actually makes it much harder to develop certain types of applications. But in general, once you understand its constraints, it's relatively easy to get around. So you can't link between pages. So what this means is you truly have to build a single page application. So your index.html, or whatever you call it, has to actually be responsible for loading all of the subsequent pages, which is a standard thing if you're using Polymer or Angular. Second, you can't load remote resources from HTML. So in your HTML, you can't be putting a script tag that goes out and gets the latest version of Angular or the latest version of Firebase or anything like that. You can't inject images or scripts. So this actually does become a problem, and I'll talk about Firebase in a little bit. And then lastly, you actually have to separate your HTML and JavaScript. So by default in normal browsers, they're very permissive, right? You can throw a script tag directly in line anywhere you want, run as much code as you want, and it'll just work just fine. But for security, the way they've built the sandbox, you can't actually embed any of your JavaScript into your HTML. You just have to create a script tag and then point it out to a local source. So the exception to this, so once again, anyone heard of Firebase before? I'm a huge fan of Firebase. So for those of you that don't know, Firebase is a backend as a service. It's a real-time backend as a service where they give you a JavaScript library, or an Android library or an iOS library. And what it actually allows you to do is bind local objects to remote objects in the database. And when you combine this with Angular, you really get this very cool triple binding effect, where when someone makes a change in the view, so you have an input field, for example, someone types it in, that automatically propagates back into your model via Angular, and your model automatically propagates back into the server. And so this is a really powerful thing because now, for example, I built, in about 2 hours, I built a complete multiplayer Tetris game. And so what it does is, I took some source code that someone else had written to play Tetris, and then there's 2 lines in that 300 line source code file that actually, one line sends, one line handles the updates, and then they're just passing the entire game state back and forth. And Firebase handles all of that in real time. So the exception that I call it here is if you are sandboxed within a Chrome app, so this is a capability where you can define a page that is isolated and sandboxed. When you do that, you're actually allowed to violate the content security policy, but then you lose access to the Chrome APIs, which is relatively important, and I'll talk through that in a little bit. So one of the implications of the content security policy is everything has to be local. So if you're used to just pointing it out to a content delivery network, that's not going to work. You have to use Bower, or you have to go and manually download each of the script files that you're going to be using. One of the second thing that I talked about was the idea that you can't link between HTML pages. So that means in Angular, this is a really easy problem to get around. You just use Angular routing. So you just include ng-route, and then you set up a single view in your index.html file so that Angular is dynamically loading the separate HTML files locally, right? So I typically have a home page, I typically have a login page, and each of those is just a different HTML file that is associated with a different Angular controller, and then that takes care of everything, and it's still a single page application. One example I forgot was, for example, I always build a single controller that handles my toolbar. So if anyone's used a mobile application or any modern desktop application, you have some sort of toolbar at the top. It's got state, right? So you've got the name of the application, you've got the ability to log out or check your profile. You often have some sort of breadcrumb that allows you to navigate the hierarchy. That's relatively easy to do with a single Angular controller and a single HTML file. So next I want to talk a little bit about some of my favorite Chrome APIs. And there's a bunch that I'll show a list later of the things that this allows you to do. But number one, identity. So everyone who's built any sort of application of any size has built the whole standard authentication flow, right? What's your username? What's your password? Did you forget password? Do you want to sign in? How are we going to handle that token? How are we going to manage this over time? How are we going to expire it? How are we going to keep it secure? That is a lot of work. And that is a lot of work that I personally don't like to do. So what this API allows me to do is I just basically say, use identity. And then when it comes to shipping that on Chrome as a platform, so when you're in the Chrome Web Store shipping onto a browser, it is actually automatic. So because the Chrome Web Store is pre-authenticated, so you actually have to access the Chrome Web Store as a Google user, the application is already allowed to know who you are, and you can immediately start acting on that. When that gets extended out into Android and iOS, it uses Google Play Services on Android, so you get that very familiar little pop-up, which account do you want to use? And then on iOS, it uses the same authentication flow as Google+. So this is a way of, without really doing any work, you get very standardized interfaces. So, as I said, on Chrome, no input, no coding at all is necessary. And then on iOS and Android, you're basically exposing out standardized dialogues. The second favorite API from Chrome that I find really useful is they've actually standardized payments. So this is a single Chrome API, which if you've ever used it for the Chrome Web Store, building a Chrome app, it kind of just, it works in the same way that all the stores do, right? You have to register products, and then users are able to purchase those products, and then the store takes a cut. I think both on iOS and Android, the cut is 30%, and on the Chrome Web Store, it's about 10%. But when you're shipping on a platform like Android in Google Play or iOS in the App Store, they're going to be taking their full cut. But what this allows you to do is you build that payment method, you build all of the handlers, all the licensing one time, and then it works across all three platforms. The last Chrome API that I want to talk about is notifications. So this is basically a Chrome Cordova built plugin that allows you to interact with the user from a notification perspective. So one of the more novel things that Chrome has done over the last few years is they've built that little notification bar at the bottom. Has everyone seen that? Okay. So what that allows you to do is give desktop notifications even if the application is not live, right? Which is, it seems like maybe that's not the best thing for a user, but when it's used appropriately, it's actually one of the most powerful things you can do that makes an application feel like an application rather than just a website, is letting someone know when something that they care about might be coming up, right? So if you use Chrome, you might see these Google Now notifications. So, hey, you have to leave by 3:30 to catch the bus, or you need to, hey, your package just got shipped. And you can actually jump into that notification stream, and then that works the same on mobile. And then one of the things that's pretty cool in terms of what you can do is I've actually built a plugin that allows you to extend those notifications out into Android Wear. So Apple Watch, not yet, but what basically this diff allows you to do is it extends the standard CCA plugin for notifications and allows you to create or add extra properties onto those notifications that add interoperability or interactivity, so that when you're using an Android Wear device, you can actually act on those notifications in the same way that most applications expose that same sort of functionality. There are a bunch more APIs that I do not have time to talk about. So there are alarms, so you can set things to trigger even when the user's not running the application. There's a file system API. You can access Google Cloud Messaging. There's a standardized internationalization library. You can check the device stats, power, sockets, storage, do audio capture, video capture, and others. There's a great list of those. I've put the list down there at the bottom. So we talked a little bit about the Chrome Dev Editor and how that actually makes it really easy to get started. But there are actually use cases for still understanding the command line side of this tool set. So has everyone here used NPM, the Node Package Manager? Okay, most of you. So if you haven't used the Node Package Manager, go download Node.js and use it. It really is the modern package manager for any sort of HTML or JavaScript-based development. It handles all of the dependency resolution, it handles versioning, and it really just makes it easy for you to ship an application without having to, or store an application in source control without having to worry about, hey, does everyone have the same version of the libraries and do they have all the right libraries, right? Because every time Angular updates from 1.3.1.1 to 1.3.1.2, I don't want to have to deal with that, right? I want to just say, yep, this is my policy. I want you to lock to this major revision, or I don't want to lock to this major revision. Throw whatever you've got at me, and then you actually just, via Bower or whatever you do, you can actually include those. So NPM is a very cool tool. It's relatively easy to install. And then after you've done that, all of the interactions to date are via command line. So I had given a few commands earlier, such as npm install -g cca. So that is basically the one-line command that installs either globally in your system or local to the project the tools that you need to run these tools. So when it comes to CCA, or the Chrome Cordova Apps toolset, this really is just a wrapper around the Cordova toolset. And so if you're ever going to be adding multiple platforms, so you saw the toolset where you can deploy to mobile. Here's where you're actually going to be doing it if you're going to be packaging that application for shipping on mobile. It comes with a lot of sample code, which is cool. So just like the Chrome Dev Editor comes with sample code, the CCA command line tools come with sample code that's really more mobile focused. You can add or remove custom plugins, which is one of the really cool things. So I talked about the ability for other people to create new extensions. So let's say someone has built a Cordova plugin for interacting with Bluetooth. You can then use that Cordova plugin and include that in a CCA application and ship that on iOS and Android. Fourth, fine-grained configuration control. So there's a lot of things you may want to do when you're building, for example, an Android app or an iOS app that are really hard to do from a pure HTML perspective because they have nothing to do with the HTML that you're shipping, right? It's all in the packaging that comes when you're building these cross-platform applications. And so you can only do that via the command line. And lastly, as I said, it exposes pure Cordova. So anything you can do in Cordova to ship mobile applications, you can also do in CCA. So the last topic that I want to talk about is really just packaging and distribution. And then hopefully we'll get into some questions and maybe some more examples. The first is one of the biggest challenges. So we've been building applications on Android for a number of years now. And I don't know if anyone else has run into this, but Android is a little bit fragmented. This is worse than you even think, right? So you've got the major Android revisions, 2.2, 2.3, et cetera, but also all the way down to the device. Every device ships with a little bit different customized software. And so Google is trying to standardize these things a little bit with Google Play Services. And everyone after, I believe it's 5.0 or 5.1, they're getting their web view directly from Google Play, which helps a ton. But everyone before that doesn't get that benefit. And so how do you make sure that you're writing HTML that's going to be shipping the same and operating the same across all of these fragmented Android devices? And the answer actually came from a company called Intel. So this is the Crosswalk project. What Crosswalk does is it actually ships a minor stripped down version of Chromium as part of your APK. So when you're building an Android application with about 14 meg of space, you actually ship your own web view. And then what that means is you control the entire stack of rendering. You control what HTML elements work, you control what features of JavaScript happen. It's really up to you then, and it's got some standard configurations that allow you to do this. It's totally up to you how you want to build your application. And so this is one of those advanced configuration options I talked about in part of CCA. So by default, they actually assume you want to use this. So not everyone does because 14 meg is actually relatively large for an Android application. But it's a way of achieving standardization when you can't and otherwise. I remember I've had long conversations both about the Samsung devices in terms of how they implement basically everything different, as well as HTC. So they actually ship a custom version of WebKit, right? So their web view isn't even the Google web view. They just ignored the Android open source project and they said, we're gonna build our own, which is fantastic for web developers. And then lastly, I wanna talk a little bit about UX. So when you're building a Chrome Cordova application, you're building inherently for both desktop and for mobile, which is a really hard thing think about and hard thing to execute effectively. Because everything from your toolbars are going to be different, everything to your input boxes are going to be different, and then, but one of the things you can do is you can actually take control of those things, right? So define your own visual style. So this is an example application that I built where everything is really just custom, right? And so it's meant to follow rough guidelines from all of the platforms, a little bit material design, but by doing that, by taking ownership of the visuals, it feels a little bit more fluid. But you'll still notice several things are kind of wrong here. So you've got these input boxes which don't match the Android. So if anyone's really detail-oriented, you'll note that on Android devices, native, there used to be a little tick up on the corners of all the input boxes. Anyone notice that? No one notices that when they're developing, but users notice that, right? It increases what's called cognitive load. So anytime your application doesn't look, feel, perform like all of the other apps on their device, they have to think about it. Their brain has to say, oh, this new information just came in. What do I do with that? And then usually they're going to throw it away, but there's time and there's energy that comes out of that. And they begin to associate that load with your application. So one of the things I should have done with this application is actually called it's an Angular project called Angular Material. Anyone heard of this project? Okay, so Angular Material is, once again, the link's down there. It's a set of directives that exposes this whole Google design methodology called material design. And so they've actually created all of the material design, all the paper elements from Polymer, and they recreated them as Angular directives. So what that means is I actually get these nice cross-device compatible UI elements that I can use in my application to make it feel less web-like. And I'll actually give a couple examples of this real quick. Where is it? Here we go. So this is a sheet of HTML elements that the Angular Material project has shipped. These are all buttons. So these are all different parameters that you can hand off to a button. And so if anyone has seen Polymer, it's got a few of the nice elements, right? So you get a different hover over state for disabled things. All of these elements have this kind of inky feel, so that when you're touching them on a touch screen, it actually feels very responsive. And this was the goal with material design, is to make things more intuitable as well as more visually appealing. And then at the same time, none of these buttons feel like a web application. I'll give another example here. So this is a standard input field, and there's actually a huge number of these. And then via some relatively simple source, so for example saying MD, which stands for material design, you can say material design input and then give it a field or give it properties. And then if we go back to the demo, once again you get this coloring, and it feels these labels are consistent, they're standardized, and then your application is going to feel like an Android app or a Lollipop app, which is really designed to be both desktop, iOS, and Android. All right, with that, I wanted to drive a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of directions that this talk can go. I understand it didn't go super deep into a code lab, for example, but I've done some of those. So what questions do you guys have about these sorts of applications? Does it make any sense in terms of why you might want to do that? Yeah.
With Ionic, obviously you and I work on
Yep.
but isn't it, I thought it was just more like a looking good UI with integration. It's still Cordova making calls to hardware like
Yeah. So going back, Ionic is a project completely independent from Chrome Cordova apps that has a very similar philosophy. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it easy to build mobile applications using purely Angular. And so what they've actually done is they've built a huge number of HTML style directives that do things like toolbars, or do things like buttons or pagination or tab bars or flip screen transitions. The problem, or the only downside with Ionic, is it can't ship in the Chrome Web Store because you have to go add that extra layer. You'd have to embed all of that code there. And then it also doesn't get you standardized APIs, which give you deeper hooks into the device. So such as that identity API. So with Ionic, you can absolutely build fantastic feeling applications that are built using HTML, but you can't, for example, call out into the notifications, right? There are ways of doing that, but then you're just going and getting a standardized Chrome or a Cordova plugin, which may or not work on desktop, or it doesn't work on desktop if you're using Ionic. Yeah.
So, if I'm understanding right, you can use this Chrome dev editor to build your application and then deploy it as an API to Android, for instance.
Yep.
Can you find that same application in the Play Store on your phone?
Yeah. So. Yep, it's an HTML5 app with a layer that intermediates the Chrome calls into Android-specific versions. So they went and they took all those useful APIs that they built for the browser, and they implemented most of them for mobile on both iOS and Android. Yeah. I have since 2011 been predicting the joining of those two stores. Every year I've been wrong so far, but with tools like Welder coming out, it seems like they're coming closer together. So I don't think Google wants to have two stores, but they don't have the universality yet where the developers are focused on targeting all these platforms yet. So I mean, with Welder, you can now build Android applications that run in the Chrome Web Store, and with this, you can actually build Chrome apps that you have to submit separately to both the Chrome Web Store and to Google Play and to the Apple Store. So I think the hope is to get rid of that over time, but even just being able to share a code base and share a development tool chain for all of those platforms is still hugely effective.
Sounds like Google's trying to do what Microsoft's doing with the Microsoft Store, where they can have like actual apps run on both Windows Phone, Windows tablet, and desktop.
Yeah, which I think we've all been chasing that promise for about 1 million years. I would say no one has delivered on it perfectly. So I mean, I started off with some of those caveats about the experience and some of the performance, that this is not appropriate for all applications. And based on what I've built for the Windows Store, it's a little bit of a desert. There's not a huge number of users looking for apps in the Windows Store. But if you contrast that with the Chrome Web Store, or if you contrast that with Google Play or the App Store, it's completely the opposite. People are looking for applications there. It's a little bit derived from this idea that I call the tyranny of the user, which is if you go back to 2008, 2009, users were excited. They were delighted to see an app in the App Store. Oh my God, my bank has an app. Great, that's amazing. But then every year that we move forward, those user expectations keep going up. And so today, if your bank does not have an app in the Play Store, they're not going to be happy. They're going to be frustrated with you. They're going to say, well, what kind of company doesn't have an app? That's dumb. And so those expectations continue to increase. So for example, I mean, with the launch of the Apple Watch, why doesn't my bank send notifications properly to my phone that I can interact with? And so those sorts of expectations continue to escalate, and we as developers have to respond to those to build great experiences that match those users' expectations. All right, any other questions? Well, I think the party is going to be starting soon, so I will let all of you guys go. Thank you so much for coming.